Here's a guy who doesn't believe in God, but thinks it's good that people pretend one does exist because that's somehow necessary to protect us from various moral panic boogeymen.
The Atheism Delusion.
Not a clickbait title at all. I'm sure this dude will totally make a case that atheism is a delusion in this video.
When asked about my religious views, I usually call myself an agnostic. But if I had to describe my views more accurately, it would be fair to say that I'm a lapsed atheist.
What is a lapsed atheist? Have you stopped going to atheist church? Do you no longer celebrate atheist holidays? Have you started sinning against the non-existence of God? Do you no longer do atheist rituals? Saying you're a lapsed atheist is like saying you've overcome your addiction to teetotaling.
Today, in a world in which the religious right has less obvious impact on our world,
it looks more obvious than ever to me. Making jokes that poke holes in its power seems to me to be more important than ever.
Jokes of this kind would have little resonance. But my youth was infused with example after example of stuffy religious conservatives attempting to enforce their values on the rest of society by attempting to censor Eminem's song lyrics, trying to prevent Monty Python's Life of Brian from being shown in cinemas, and trying to push through the idea that creationism should be taught in schools.
They're still trying to get science taken out of schools and put their religion into them, and they're gaining more traction in that project than they have in decades. State legislatures are more ban-happy than ever with respect to what books are allowed to be in classrooms and libraries.
This backdrop provided the perfect opportunity for the emergence of daring countercultural figures who could use their erudition, wit, and refreshing honesty to effortlessly take apart the tired old arguments for a religious worldview.
And the dead ones would be spinning in their graves if they could see what their fans are pushing nowadays.
Sam Harris became a hero to many when he found himself attempting to articulate the problem with Islam on Bill Maher's show, only to be shouted down by Ben Affleck in what quickly became the talk of the internet.
I guess there are many who have a very low bar for what they consider heroism.
Not content with proving that religion wasn't true, they ventured further in attempting to prove religion was, at best, unnecessary and, more likely, harmful.
Isn't that what you just said that people considered Sam Harris a hero for doing?
To this end, Dawkins wrote The God Delusion in 2006, and Hitchens delivered God is Not Great the following year. The argument was no longer about encouraging religious people to calm down and leave the rest of us alone. It was increasingly that religion was inherently wrong and bad.
You say that like it was a change of course rather than the case from the beginning.
It was around this point that I began to lose my faith in atheism.
Well, see, your first problem is that you took atheism on faith rather than rationally inferring it from the inherent logical impossibility of theism.
The God Delusion was the last Dawkins book I read, and the appeal of that discussion waned quickly for several reasons. First, it was clear to me that to attempt to challenge Islamic extremists with facts and logic, as Dawkins, Hitchens, and Harris had done, was to fail on purpose.
So what are you proposing, that we fight bullshit with bullshit?
Despite their efforts, most of the Western world today operates under de facto blasphemy laws, which are enforced not by religious activists lobbying for censorship, but by knife-wielding fanatics and suicide bombers. The liberalism that the new atheists so enthusiastically espouse, the idea that we should be free to criticize, mock, and satirize anything, including religion, only works when the government is willing to protect you from the consequences.
If you made the argument that governments are not very effective at combating religiously motivated violence, or that they're not aggressive enough, I wouldn't agree, but I could see why someone would have that opinion given how sensationalized religious violence is in the media. However, the idea that Western governments aren't willing to chase after Muslims is utterly absurd. If that were the case, there wouldn't be a single Muslim in Guantanamo.
In seeking to liberate us from the tyrannical instincts of dogmatic Christians, the new atheists actually delivered us into the hands of a different and far more pernicious religious zealotry, from which the ordinary citizen has no security at all.
No security at all? I must somehow not be an ordinary citizen then, given how I have been able to get away with criticizing Muslim apologists for over a decade with total impunity. And even if you think the government is not willing to protect people from Muslims, how would that be the fault of the folks standing up for atheism? How have the new atheists delivered us into the hands of Muslim fundamentalists? They criticize all Abrahamic religions, including Islam, so I guess this guy thinks that not giving Christian nonsense a pass somehow gives the upper hand to Muslim nonsense.
Second, the fact that many religious ideas are scientifically inaccurate and that religion has been and continues to be used for evil is not in dispute. Indeed, one of the core claims of the new atheists is that religion produced evils that were far worse than the body count of non-believers. Sure, Stalin, Hitler, Mao were bad, they argued, but they weren't motivated by their atheism or its holy book.
What was the holy book of atheism that all three of those guys were following? Also, Hitler was not an atheist. He was not a fan of Christianity, but in Tischgespräche, the book most commonly cited as evidence that he was an atheist, he says, Der Mensch soll in der Lage sein, die ihm vom Gott gegebenen Fähigkeiten zu entwickeln. This means humanity ought to be in a position to develop its God-given abilities. This book is often cited by people who want to paint him as an atheist because while he would publicly declare himself to be Christian, this book is a collection of his private conversations in which he admits his disdain for Christianity. However, as the quote I cited shows, he still, even in private, talked about God as though he believed in one. Ironically, his views about religion and atheism are very similar to those held by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Constantine here, and several other people who think we should just go along with Christianity for cynically political purposes. In a speech on March 23, 1933, he said, "The national government sees in both Christian denominations the most important factor for the maintenance of our society. It will respect the agreements concluded between them and the federal states. Their rights are not to be infringed. The government, however, regards Christianity as the unshakable foundation of the moral and ethical life of our people." In another speech on October 24th of the same year, he said, "We were convinced that the people need and require this faith. We have therefore undertaken the fight against the atheistic movement, and that not merely with a few theoretical declarations. We have stamped it out."
This view of the whole Stalinism and the Great Leap Forward as accidental byproducts of a non-complicit atheism is, to me, a complete misunderstanding of the impact a lack of religious faith has on the way we think about other human beings. The central positive feature of the religious worldview is to ensure that human beings do not see themselves as the sole arbiters of truth and justice.
Exactly the opposite is true. Apologists love to quote that line in Brothers Karamazov that goes, "If there is no God, everything is permitted." On the contrary, as Slavoj Žižek pointed out, it is only if you can convince people that what you are doing is God's will that they will let you get away with doing whatever you like.
That having torn God down from his pedestal, we do not put ourselves in his place.
What else should be in his place? This guy seems to think that we need to put some kind of bull there. We can't just be walking around thinking for ourselves, now can we? It's like Jordan Peterson says, a so-called free thinker is one who has neither an idea nor a clear and coherent thought, who leads his parasitic existence in the shelter of society. Oh wait, no, that wasn't Peterson, that was Hitler. He also believed that you can't just let people think for themselves.
But the problem here is that the absence of old religion seems to produce only a vacuum into which a new religion rushes in. And this new religion has just as little regard for the truth as the old ones. That's why Richard Dawkins, who spent his best years arguing with creationists, is now increasingly forced to explain basic biological concepts like the inability to change your sex by incantation on national television.
If you define sex by chromosomes and/or gametes, which critics of transness tend to do, then literally nobody believes those can be changed at all, let alone by incantation. Rejecting the overwhelming preponderance of psychological evidence for the legitimacy of transness resembles religion far more than accepting that evidence does.
The reason new atheism has lost its mojo is that it has no answers to the lack of meaning and purpose that our post-Christian societies are suffering from. What will fill that void? Religious people have their answer. Do the rest of us?
Do the rest of us need to be spoon-fed a fake meaning and a fake purpose? Are we grown up enough to figure those out for ourselves? Or do you think we can't be trusted to do that lest we become the next Stalin or Mao? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.